All right, let's dive into a real-life scientific mystery. We're talking about two devastating conditions of the human brain, ALS and FTD. One of them attacks the body, and the other one attacks the mind. Now, on the surface, they seem like they're from completely different worlds, but as it turns out, science is uncovering this hidden link between them, a connection that is absolutely changing our understanding of both.
So first things first, let's get our key players straight. On one side, you've got ALS, Amyotrophic Lateral Sclerosis. This is a disease of the motor neurons. Think of it as the wiring that controls all our muscles. It robs a person of their ability to move, to speak, and eventually even to breathe. Then on the other side, we have FTD, Frontotemporal Dementia. This is a disease of the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain, and it affects the very core of who we are, our personality, our behavior, our ability to use language.
And that right there brings us to the central puzzle. I mean, it seems impossible, doesn't it? How could a disease that locks someone inside their own body be related to one that completely changes their personality? Well, it turns out the first clues were hiding in plain sight, with the patients themselves.
You know, the first crack in that wall separating these two diseases didn't come from some high-tech lab. It came from doctors just paying close attention to their patients. They started noticing that the neat, clear line between a motor disease and a cognitive disease, well, it was starting to get really blurry.
And the sheer scale of this overlap is just staggering. Researchers found that up to half, that's right, 50% of all patients diagnosed with ALS also show some level of cognitive or behavioral changes. You know, the classic symptoms of FTD. This wasn't some rare exception, this was happening all the time.
And for a pretty significant number of people, it's not just a few mild changes. Somewhere between 10 and 15% of people with ALS go on to develop the full textbook definition of frontotemporal dementia. Their diagnosis literally becomes both diseases at once.
And get this, it's not a one-way street. The mystery just gets deeper, because doctors also saw the exact reverse happening. Patients who were first diagnosed with FTD would later start developing the muscle weakness and motor problems of ALS. The two were just undeniably connected.
Okay, so with such strong evidence coming from the clinic, the investigation had to go deeper. It moved from the patient's bedside to the microscope. The big question was, if the symptoms were overlapping, could there be a shared culprit at the biological level? So scientists started following the protein trail.
And that trail led them straight to this guy, a protein called TDP-43. Now, in a healthy brain, TDP-43 is a good citizen. It does its job, stays out of trouble. But in certain diseases, it starts to go rogue. It clumps together, forming these toxic buildups inside our neurons, and becomes a prime suspect in causing those cells to die.
And this is where the case gets really solid. When scientists looked at the brains of ALS patients, what did they find? These toxic clumps of TDP-43, right there in the motor neurons. Okay, then they looked at the brains of most FTD patients, and they found the exact same thing, just in a different neighborhood, the frontal and temporal lobes. It was the same biological smoking gun at two completely different crime scenes.
Finding a shared rogue protein was a massive discovery. But the final, undeniable proof, the clue that would lock these diseases together forever, was hidden even deeper. It was written in our very own DNA.
Because see, the connection isn't just about what goes wrong inside the cells after we're born. The most powerful evidence of all explains why it goes wrong in the first place. And that answer? Well, it's written directly into our genetic blueprint.
And this is it, the single biggest genetic breakthrough in this entire story. It's a gene, and it's called C9orf72. It might not be a catchy name, I'll give you that, but its discovery completely, and I mean completely, changed the game.
Okay, so here's why this is so critical. A specific mutation in this one gene is the #1 genetic cause of familial ALS. That's the kind that runs in families. So what else is it? It's also the #1 genetic cause of familiar FTD. The exact same genetic typo can lead to either disease. It's the ultimate proof that they share a common origin. And then you have other shared genes like TARDBP and FUS that just seal the deal. There's no denying it.
So, with all of this evidence piling up, the clinical overlap, the shared protein, and the identical genetic root, scientists basically had to throw out the old way of thinking. This forced them to come up with a brand new, unified understanding.
Yeah, we just can't look at ALS and FTD as two totally separate, distinct illnesses anymore. The evidence simply doesn't support that. It forces us to take on a much more integrated, much more nuanced view of what's really going on.
And this is that new view. It's now officially known as the ALS-FTD spectrum disorder. The way to think about it now is that pure ALS is at one end of a continuum, and pure FTD is at the other. But in between, there's this huge gray area, this spectrum of overlap, where patients can have any mix of motor and cognitive symptoms. They aren't two separate diseases, they're really just two faces of the same underlying problem.
So what this all comes down to is a shared biological identity. I mean, from the overlapping genes that kick the whole problem off, to the shared proteins that are actually doing the damage, all the way to how the neurons ultimately break down. Biologically, they are deeply, deeply intertwined.
And you know, this whole discovery leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. If two diseases that looked so different on the surface are actually just 2 points on a single spectrum, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other brain conditions, maybe like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, might have these secret connections that we just haven't found yet? It seems the lines we draw between diseases might be a whole lot blurrier than we ever imagined.